Hey, Jennifer Adams here, and it is Monday of Holy Week. Yesterday, we saw Jesus coming into Jerusalem, riding the donkey, everybody waving the palm branches. And today, we see him heading for the temple. And in Mark, we're still in Mark 11, there is the parable of the fig tree. And it starts in Mark 11, verse 12. And I'm just going to read it to you. It says, on the following day, when they came from Bethany, he was hungry. And seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see if he could find anything on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. And his disciples heard it. And then the chapter just shifts, and all of a sudden we're heading to the temple. So as they came to Jerusalem, he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. He would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them, and he said to them, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. And the chief priests and the scribes heard it, and they were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him, because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. And when evening came, they went out of the city. And so this all happens on that Monday of Holy Week, this final week leading up to the cross. And then if you read right after that, it goes into the next morning, which will be tomorrow, Tuesday, they're coming back into the city and they see the fig tree again. And they talk about Peter notices, hey, look, that fig tree that you cursed and has withered. So let's just talk just for a few minutes about the fig tree and the temple. Okay, how do these go together? How do these relate? If you have been doing this study with me, I've talked a couple times about this literary device that Mark uses. It's called a Markan sandwich, where he starts a story, he stops mid-story, he inserts another story, and then he goes back and finishes the first story. Well, this is an example here. You've got the fig tree story with the temple story right in the middle. And the reason that he does this is because that middle story in there, the meat of the sandwich, it provides context and commentary on the story that starts and ends the whole thing. And so when you're reading this, you can read the story and be like, hey, what's going on with the fig tree? Like, why is Jesus seeing a fig tree? There's no figs and he curses it. I mean, what did the poor tree do, right? And so we can read that story and it can just feel a little random. Like, why is that in there? But then when you see the temple story and then going back to the fig tree, you realize that this fig tree is a lesson. He is trying to teach the disciples something. And we've seen this with Jesus. He's always looking for those teachable moments. This fig tree represented Jerusalem. More specifically, it represented the temple. And Jesus was coming into Jerusalem, but he had a mission. He was heading for the temple. And Jesus was going to the temple to inspect it and to see what kind of condition God's people were in. Were they loving God? Were they living righteously? Were they doing the things that God had commanded them to do? Were they waiting in this hopeful expectation for the coming Messiah, which was him? What condition, and was there fruit? Was there fruit in their life of them loving God and serving God and obeying God? So he's heading for the temple to inspect it. He gets to the temple and he does not find what he's looking for. He does not find fruit. And just like he is cursing this fig tree for not bearing fruit, that is what it's made to do. It's made to bear fruit, and it wasn't. And I was reading some commentary on it, and this was happening at Passover. So this would have been early spring, like April probably. And a fig tree will start getting its leaves around that time. And about a week or so after the leaves have started, then it will start to get the little buds of the fig trees, and they'll start out small, but they'll just be these little green buds, and they'll be, I said one thing I read said about the size of an almond. But there was a name for those, and I can't remember it now. But you could eat those. It was before the fig was actually full and ripe and at maturity, but you could still eat those little green buds. And a lot of times the people traveling down the road or the pheasants, they would pick those off of the fig tree to eat. And so the fig tree at this point, it really should have had some of that. So the fact that it was just leaves and there was no fruit, that really told you this tree wasn't going to bear fruit. There was something wrong with this tree. But this was not a story about a tree. This was much, much deeper than that. And just like Jesus curses the fig tree and says, you will never bear fruit again, we see Jesus going into the temple. And then later, we're going to see later on in these coming up chapters where he proclaims judgment and destruction on the temple. And it's going to happen. It's not going to be long after Jesus' death and resurrection that Jerusalem is conquered and the temple is destroyed. And we saw this all throughout the Old Testament, and we see it again here, or for the Jewish people. When they were not obeying God, they were not serving God, they were not doing what he had commanded them to do, he would come in with destruction. They would go under oppression. They would have some rulers come in and begin to oppress them. They would come under bondage, and often it was their temple. It was their temple that would be destroyed as a result of the way they were living and the fact that they were not bearing fruit. Jesus was coming to inspect the temple and to see if they were bearing fruit. And this fig tree was a picture of what it was he was finding as he went into Jerusalem. And this passage challenges me. It convicts me, because I think that we can read the story of Jesus in the temple and what he's doing, turning over tables and driving everybody out, right? And we can read that and we can immediately begin to think of all the people that, need to experience that side of Jesus. They're just not doing it right. They're not living godly. Like they're not understanding their Bible and what they're supposed to do. And they just need a little bit of that Jesus in their life. And it can be easy to point the finger when we read this story. But yet in 1 Corinthians 6:17, it tells us, and I want to read that to you. 1 Corinthians 6:19. It tells us this: do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own. You were bought with a price. And we're going to see that price that was paid in just a few days as Jesus goes to the cross. But it says, you are not your own. You were bought with a price, so glorify God in your body. And listen, before we start pointing the finger at other people who are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, we need to look to ourselves. We need to look to our temple. We have the Holy Spirit residing within us. We are a temple. And is there fruit coming out of our temple? What would Jesus find if he came to inspect our temple? And, when he talks in here about my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, it challenged me. What does my relationship with God look like? What does my prayer life look like? Is there anything in my life that is stealing that time away for me to spend time with God, spend time in his word, spend time in prayer? And listen, that's what the temple was all about. If you go all the way back to the Old Testament, the temple was that place where the people could go and make their sacrifices so they could have connection with God. It was all about relationship with God and communion with God, and that place where they could come and they could be with him. And that's what Jesus was coming to see. Are they doing what they've been told to do? Are they walking out this relationship with me? And we need to ask ourselves the same question. What condition is our temple today? Are we bearing the fruit that God has called us to bear? I don't know about you, but I want Jesus to come and I want Jesus to find fruit in my life. And so this was what was happening on Monday of Holy Week. And I want to thank you for joining me today. We'll be back again later this week to talk about some more of the things that were happening in this final week, because there was a lot that was going on. In fact, a third of the book of Mark is devoted to just this week. So there is a lot of content, but I hope you're reading along with us. We are reading Mark 14 through 16 this week and just taking us all the way up until Easter Sunday. But thanks for joining me today. I hope you are blessed, and I will see you later this week.